our next agenda item is our fiscal year 25 budget and management reserve. Mr. Pittard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of items before I dive into the presentation. I guess first, just heard about exploring the option of the Christiansburg extension. In this budget, we're still maintaining the Cinnabar site as far as the rest of the budget until we get through that feasibility of both the design and the financial perspective on that alternative that we spoke of just before lunch. Second, I want to reiterate that the budget development really is a continuous process where we're doing financial planning all the time. We look at all the sources of funding, all the uses of funding. It's really a holistic approach that we both look at our capital spend and our operational spend. The mantra is when we get done with all these big capital projects, we got to be able to afford to operate the trains at that point. It also takes a look at the entire life cycle of those capital projects from beginning to end. So in this budget, you see FY 21 through FY 31 is part of that financial planning process. So with that, I will jump into the slides that we have. And if you recall here, last May, we had a funding shortfall on our required projects, and we took a real hard look, and there was a lot of discussion around trying to come up with better estimates, and we kind of put in place a point in time where we would develop a baseline for both budget and spending, and that was at 30% design, which essentially we said we come to you for money to do 30% design. And then once we got to 30% design and had a better budget, had a better schedule, then we'd ask you for approval to move forward. As we've now moved forward past 30%, we also realized there's a lot of budgeting and scheduling changes going on constantly in that process from that 30% to when we actually get a final construction bid. And so as part of this year and looking at all that as those projects move forward, we came to the conclusion we need to have a second point where we change those baselines. And that is when we get a final construction bid. That's when we will come to you and say, we're going to adjust the budget, ask for your approval, and adjust the schedule. It's not to say that I think we had some discussion about projects, so it's constantly looking at budget and schedule. I think you've heard that throughout a lot of different people's discussions. So next, this is the high level, basically last May, compared to where we are today. And what you see at the top on this is you see that unfunded of $705 million on the required project. So last year we had a budget where we had the required projects, and Long Ridge being the largest one, where we had a significant unfunded balance. And our plan was to go to the federal government. We did that. We got $829 million of funding. I think it was November timeframe, if I recall correctly. So last year we had that issue, we solved it, and now we're looking at May of this year, and we're actually in balance where all the required projects are funded, and we have a management reserve of $150 million. So you see, we did sources of $1.24 billion. We had about the same amount of uses, which is the biggest part of that. There's two real big parts to it. The unfunded balance, and then we added $200 million to the V-line or the Cinnabar transaction back in January. And one more thing I didn't say, feel free at any time to ask questions. Yes, ma'am.
So when you say we went to the government, what does that mean?
Went to the federal government.
Yeah.
To FRA.
So is those the grants? Or is some of our funding come from formula funding, or what is our funding actually?
We don't have any formula funding.
We don't have any formula.
Not on the federal side, you have formula on the states.
There is no for inner city passengers.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the funding is, so we have uses and that is, what exactly does
That
that
uses
take up?
is all of the capital projects
Mhm,
and all the operational costs. So in this slide here, we're
mhm,
looking at all of the capital project costs
mhm.
and all the operational costs from 21 all the way to 30. And the only exception to that is we do eliminate when a project is completed.
Mhm.
So it's done and we paid for it. There's no reason to continue keeping that in this analysis.
Okay, so this is the aggregate.
It's after.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
And 31 is when we get to the end, the current plan in the capital projects.
So how does it work in government accounting? Do you have like restricted, unrestricted, or how do you?
So we work on an enterprise fund basis.
Okay.
So it's full accrual. Don't want to, we
Yeah.
have to follow GASB, not FASB, but it's more like a for-profit
Okay.
accounting.
Thank you.
Next slide. So that was sort of an overview of the budget last year compared to this year at a macro level, looking at the financial plan. This next slide is just looking at what we briefed you from January of 25 when we did the briefing on the budget to May today, the changes that have occurred in that time. And what you see is we've had a reduction in some of the sources of funding. We had a reduction in some of the uses of the funding. And the net of that was we can add 20 million more to our management reserve. The next few slides will give you more detail as far as what the 70 million and 9 million are. So that's $70 million. The biggest part was operational revenues. So our Northeast Corridor share. So our revenues from passenger tickets are broken down between intra-Virginia and Northeast Corridor. When our trains get on the Northeast Corridor, we share that revenue with Amtrak. And the Northeast Corridor portion has lagged. And based on where that is, we pushed that projection through. So that's the adjustment, that's $79 million. I will say we've been working with Amtrak. Their team's been very receptive. That I think we have a twice a month call with them and talk about fares and looking at the analysis of where things are trending. They've been very receptive. And I think it was about 2 months ago, they actually adjusted the Northeast Corridor side of the fare charts that we use. So we hope that's going to come around, but it hasn't quite been enough time to really see the end result.
Yeah, I want to publicly thank Ray Lang and his team working with us on this. They're very receptive.
It's been a very welcome change. So,
Steve, can I ask a question on that? Is Jeremy going to cover that again? Because I know early on the slide deck we had like ridership up 11%, fares are flat. Is that going to be covered in his presentation later? I would address this.
I don't know if Jeremy's here.
He's out in the anteroom.
He's,
Yeah, I mean,
he's on, is that part of it?
So I would say this, we could probably do a more in-depth presentation. You know, maybe the next board meeting, we could get into that. Like I said, we have these bi-weekly meetings, Amtrak, and maybe we could share more detail there. And I don't know if you all recall, but I think it was in November, we came through and we talked to you a little bit about there was going to be a fare increase. Because I think when we started this analysis, we discovered that fares had not changed. I think it was either 2018 or 2019 that fares had not been adjusted. So we chose to say, let's do that fare increase in a two-step process. We implemented the first step. We have not implemented the second step. So maybe that's where we go next. What we saw from that was we were changing the intra-Virginia, and it actually brought in more revenue. And it didn't, the ridership is showing, it didn't really seem to have a negative impact on ridership. And I said Amtrak has increased their side. So, but I guess to answer your question, maybe if you'd like, maybe we could put on the agenda of the office meeting, go into more detail about it.
Sure. Or maybe Jeremy's going to cover it later. That'd be big.
Yeah. So the top part, that was the main item, was the 79 from the operations revenue. slight adjustment to our long-term dedicated tax revenue, the Commonwealth Rail Fund revenues. The bottom part of this slide is basically taking the sources and just showing you over a quarterly basis how they are changing. And I think you can see there's positive movement and there's negative movement going on in that planning process. And then finally, the last part of this is the management reserve, and once again, taking you through changes. Y'all had approved the 124 in each quarter. You've approved the 270 million, and then you approved the 130. At the end of my presentation, I'll be asking you to approve the current reserve of 150. So this next slide, what we did here, these are very similar to what we showed you in January. Don't expect you to remember all that, but hopefully you can see the color shaded in sort of a reddish orangish color. Those are the items that have changed. So this is where we're drilling down to show you that change of, I thought it was $90 million in uses. So we did have in this top line, the I-95 corridor, about a $41 million change there. And then in the operations side, we had some changes. The biggest operational change between January and today is the new methodology for PRIA 209 and how costs are allocated. That actually to all the states that have intrastate passenger or long distance passenger service. That actually got finalized and we got the projections and it was a significant positive for Virginia. Actually, there's going to be lower costs going forward, which helped to offset some of that lost the revenue I was talking about in the NEC. The next couple of slides go into more detail. So here's that increase of $41 million to a project was the Hanover third track siding advanced to 30% design. And the current budget is $41 million additional as of that 30%. Additionally, down here at the very bottom, there's $3 million of transaction costs related to the I-95 corridor. We're still doing a lot of work on the right-of-way and survey of the actual corridor and trying to finalize that. And also some legal costs too to get some confirmation done for the properties. So going now over to the operations side, if you recall, back in January on the operations side, we really just a real high level look. We included it in the planning process, but as far as actually presenting a budget, you're not required to present an operational budget per se for CTV approval. So we just did a real high level estimate of an operational budget. So there's going to be a little bit more detail here today on the operations side. This shows the operations through 2031. And the biggest change is from last year to this year. Last year, the planning window I spoke of earlier went through 2030. This year, capital projects, the end dates pushed a little into 2031. So to look at that holistically, like I said earlier, we needed to add year 2031, which is adding both sources of funding and uses. So in this case, this is showing that extra year. You see the $276 million. And then you see changes to the base, which is if you ignored the FY31 and what other changes occurred, you see a lot of these lower amounts, 106 million. And then the second item to point out here is the administrative cost of $106 million. We recently, this has not been signed, but it is at Federal Railroad Administration on their desk to be signed, but we recently got approval from the VPRA for our cost allocation plan, which is basically looking for an indirect cost rate to build to projects, build to those federal awards we're talking about. Included, and before I go any further, I want to say included within the capital projects these costs have always been included. So the cost of managing the project, cost of Mike McLaughlin, some of my costs, that's what we're talking about. They've always been in these budgets. So it's not adding anything to the budget, it's merely the classification within this document. So instead of it being called administrative, we're now have come up with a basis and a percentage of all the overhead costs to be able to allocate that out to all the capital projects, as well as the Amtrak operations. So we get to a true cost of the project and a true cost of our Amtrak operations. So that's why you see such a large change there, that over a 10-year window of administrative costs going down is now a lot of that's being allocated over the project. Once again, looking at it from just a 1 year, that's what this next slide is taking last year to this year. And once again, point out we changed down here at the very bottom the operations and administration budget. See that significant change because of the cost allocation plan. In the middle, you see a reduction in the actual train operations expense, which is what I referenced earlier, the new pre-09 methodology. It actually benefited us. And then the third item I'll point out here is the total operating revenues. It does show an increase. See, the NEC is flat, but the intra-Virginia, which is the very top line train revenue, we are showing about a 10% increase with those revenues. This next slide takes our administrative budget and breaks it down in a lot more detail. Two main points here. Two main points. First, I'll go through main changes. So professional services, we do have an increase. A big part of that is in the coming year, we're going to be pushing forward with two of our debt financing initiatives. So first with the I-66 inside the Beltway initiative, working with VDOT and that. And there's going to be some costs with doing some revenue studies and then also with financial advisors. And then second, and this is a real positive too, is pushing forward with the debt related to the Amtrak ticket revenue. So it took a while working with Amtrak. We finally gotten now approval for those passenger ticket revenues to actually be sent to us directly, well, through them, but in a gross dollar amount. Whereas before they were always netted against the cost. And so essentially we received no funding. There was a subsidized service there. And what that allows us to do is that stream of funding, so that the prior slide had $86 million of revenues. It allows us to go out and bond against that stream of revenue. Now, this is just the first year we agreed to do it. So we got to get through this year, make sure operationally the two teams work well, and then maybe we can work towards a longer agreement. In addition to that, we have to start working through some outside advisors to start building investment grade revenue studies on it. So that's why this professional services, those two items, big two items on that professional services. Information technology is up. Last year we implemented financial ERP. In the current year, we did the acquisition, the procurement of our project management information system. The coming years, I think right around now, we're beginning early stages of that implementation. And then on top of that, Jeremy and his team are working on an enterprise asset management system. DJ said earlier, all the different rail lines we own a lot of different lines and we own a lot of different assets. Eventually, we're going to be more responsible to contract that out versus just saying to our CSX, hey, you maintain it. So knowing what we have and what's the life of it. So those two systems plus the financial ERP still has an underlying annual cost. So that's why the information technology is up. The other item I will point out, other employee costs are down. And that's really just matching that to what we've seen in the history perspective. It's been over budgeted for the past few years. Funds weren't being utilized, so we have a better perspective on what things. The other main point before I move along is the cost allocation plan. That's what these last two columns are on this table. It's showing the breakout to either the Amtrak operations or the capital project administration. So it's taking this total, I call it overhead, and saying how it's allocated. So this is what we added last May, and I think it's a great slide. It just sort of gives y'all an idea of where our thinking is in that planning process as far as risk. You see here the I-66 total financing, and the reason I have that as high is we started receiving some PAYGO funding from that stream. However, the amount we received for fiscal year 24, what was put in the budget for fiscal year 25, the data given to us by VDOT lowered that amount of PAYGO funding. And that had me somewhat concerned because our thought had been the longer we can delay that financing, the more the traffic will return to the I-66 corridor. And the more the traffic returns, then more toll revenues and the more we can finance. So I'll say this I am not overly worried. We are doing a study with VDOT right now that by the end of August, we should have a tier 1 total revenue study completed, which will actually, I hope, allay my concern that today I have it as high, and hopefully we can move this to a more moderate rate. Second item, already talked about Amtrak revenue financing. That financing, we do have a portion of it, $210 million is a part of our funding sources. So really big deal to be able to get through that in Amtrak, to start receiving those funds, and there's still, that's like the first step of maybe 5 major steps. So still a little bit of concern where we get through all of those steps. And finally, the last slide I have is on our management reserve. This is by the board adopted policy each quarter. We need to ask for your approval. So this would be through March 31st of 2024. And as showed you earlier how we built up to this $150 million amount. I'll add, it's not on the slide. Per the policy, y'all's goal is 5% of that, of the capital, that planning window the financial planning window. That's the goal that y'all set out, and that 5% equates to $284 million as of March 31st. So we will have $150 million reserve balance. With the goal was listed as in the policy as up to 5%. So I feel like we're in a good place there also. With that, I entertain questions. If there are none, then I would ask for approval of the budget and then approval of the management reserve.
So we've got 2 actions. Let's take the budget first. So the resolution for you is to approve the VPRA fiscal year 25 budget. Motion to approve.
Second.
Ms. Dorsch, seconded by Ms. Colton. Any discussion, questions?
Regarding your projection for Amtrak, did I read this correct? I think you said it, it's you projected 10% increase?
And that's over the budget from last year.
Yes.
So a lot of that 10% is knowledge of where we're tracking actuals.
Okay, so you feel confident with that?
Yes.
And also this I-66 inside the Beltway total revenue, I didn't realize we were a beneficiary of part of that, right?
Yeah, there's a memorandum of agreement that, look at Mr. Preston.
Yes, we're on our 3rd iteration of that, but it's a relationship between VDOT, DRPT, and the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And so it sets out parameters for the use of the toll revenues coming off of 66 inside the Beltway,
Yes.
which is operated, the tolling there is operated by VDOT. It's not a concessionaire or private.
So how does that work then? Does DRPT, you mentioned that, so we don't get all of that goes to DRPT, we get a portion thereof.
So the first call on the funding is to take care of the operations and maintenance of the facility
Okay,
by VDOT. Then there's a commitment that there's an allocation that goes to the NDTC for their
yes.
commuter choice program. It's spelled out with an amortization schedule. It started at 10 million. It's grows at 2.5% a year. They get their piece, and then once that is funded, then the next piece goes towards crossings of the Potomac, which would be Long Bridge and any future projects related to the Roslyn Tunnel on the metric system.
Yeah.
And debt, yes, debt is in there as well.
And once we issue our debt, then that, obviously, debt for us is up that way.
Right.
And then my third question, you mentioned formula money from Virginia
So
for rail.
for rail, yes.
So what's the, how do I say, what's the revenue generator for that fund? Where's that come
All
from?
of the revenues that go into transportation as a whole, gas tax,
Okay,
insurance,
that's everything.
premium, everything goes into one big fund now that's divided up by mode. And for the Commonwealth Rail Fund, 93% comes through DRPT to VPRA, 7% is retained by DRPT for our great programs and for rail.
Okay,
We have a great chart that we can send you that shows everything in the transportation trust fund and how it flows down. It's busy, but it's really helpful about where the money comes from.
yeah, could you, TJ, I think that'd be really helpful to everybody, yeah, no, for everybody to see what that. So therefore, there's in the trust fund, if I may use that terminology, there is an intercity rail bucket that, and that's divided by formula, correct?
So there's the Commonwealth Rail Fund, 93% comes to VPRA, passenger rail, 7% stays with DRPT for freight and rail planning. And I mean, that, one of the big changes to the code, not only did VPRA get established in 2020, but really consolidating all of those revenue sources into one fund, leveled out the ups and downs from the different revenue sources, because as the economy kind of comes and goes, the old formula had certain revenues going to transit and certain revenues going to rail and certain revenues going to highway. And sometimes the highway side got more and the transit side got less. Everything went into one bucket and then the shares got broken out by mode. And that leveled everything out, makes it much more predictable for us to plan and to look.
So the federal side formula money, the 20% that goes to the state, that goes to DRPT, and that goes to then that goes to, parts of that goes to NBCC, correct? DRPT still has that responsibility, correct?
Are we talking about 66? Because there's no.
No, 66. No, the funds you get from the feds, the 20% of transit funds that you get from the feds for transit, just talking about transit in general, that still goes to DRPT.
Yes, there's nothing transit related.
No, exactly.
So the rural human service goes to DRPT.
Yeah, okay.
And some of that, does any of that formula fund flow through potentially the VRE?
Not through us, they get theirs through PRTC, it's a direct recipient.
Correct.
Oh,
So that does not come through, all the urban funds direct recipients to transit agencies. You go through PRTC.
Yeah, it's a split between us, WMATA, and Mark Trains. That's who we bundle with.
oh, so not NBCC, they don't get any, they don't have any funding. Okay.
There's state money that comes from
Right.
DRPT to NBTC to DRE.
I gotcha.
That's an even more complex
We
map
can
than the one
keep
DJ is gonna send you
Yeah.
to talk about all the different organizations and how money flows.
Yeah, that was very useful, and DJ, that'd be great to have that.
Jennifer, you did an excellent job at that.
That's very confusing.
It is very
The first couple of years, we included that number,
Check it
but we haven't anymore, we should
Yeah.
send it out, because it's complex, but that chart makes it very clear.
Well, and just one last little tidbit, the Commonwealth Rail Fund money we get in our, what is our establishing language for the authority, it prohibits us from issuing debt against that. So that's why we're looking at these Amtrak revenues. It may seem counterintuitive because it's subsidized. But we're
So that's what
fortunate.
you're, that we're issuing a debt off of that.
Yeah. It's all about the debt capacity of the Commonwealth. So one of the little provisions that 2020 session.
Big year.
Yeah. And I have to say, I think you're saying this, I think it's great because we used to have a rail fund that was dedicated, like recordation tax. So when the housing market was going great, we might be doing fine, but the housing market wasn't doing well. All of a sudden rail was suffering. And now
We don't have.
all of those shared those ups and downs. It really was landmark change.
And at the risk of, I would say this and then I'll say I'm going to complicate things. There's also toll revenues that come out of 66 outside the Beltway and out of 95. The ones on 95 go to NBTC. VRE's been the beneficiary of some of that funding. The toll revenues that are dedicated to transit from 66 outside the Beltway come to DRPT, and that those projects are funded to DRPT 6-year program. VRE's also been the beneficiary of that. So there's all of those toll projects have a transit component that can benefit, in particular VRE, but the rail infrastructure here. So I think it's just worth pointing that out. That's still, 66 outside is still very early on. We're just getting to the point where we're starting to see some of that funding come through.
Okay, it's interesting.
All right, any other questions? Great. Where did we leave off, Mary? So
We had a good discussion, yeah.
We did. Thank you.
That was the discussion.
That was a nice discussion. Good. Got her. All right, so please call the roll. Big day.
Ms. Bullock? Aye. Ms. Boucher?
Aye.
Mr. Cardwell?
Aye.
Mr. Delandro?
Aye.
Ms. Dorsch?
Aye.
Ms. Drake? Aye. Ms. Moses Ned? Aye. Mr. Spore?
Aye.
Mr. Watkins?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next action is approval of the management reserve balance for the quarter.
Move for approval.
Second. Motion by Ms. Dorsch, second by Ms. Bulova. Any discussion or questions on management reserve? Great, hearing none. Mary Stowe, could you call the roll?
Ms. Bullock?
Aye.
Ms. Boucher?
Aye.
Mr. Cardwell?
Aye.
Mr. Delandro?
Aye.
Ms. Dorsch?
Aye.
Ms. Drake?
Aye.
Ms. Moses Ned? Aye. Mr. Spore?
Aye.
Mr. Watkins?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Fitter.
Thank you all.
All right, next item on our agenda is an update on the Long Bridge South package procurement. We have Mr. Constantine and Mr. Constantine.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, good afternoon, Madam Chair, Executive Director, Board, and attendees. We're pleased to present again on Long Bridge progress. It's an honor to do this. Right? We've had some activity since our last updates and certainly wanted to give those updates to the board, keep everybody and the public as well apprised of our activities. We are under an active procurement, so we'll have to maintain some level of confidentiality with the content. However, we will tell what we can. To orient ourselves again, Long Bridge project, where is it? So if you look at the map all the way to the left of the page, the orange segment represents Long Bridge in its entirety. The inset, and of course, it's nestled between the 6 miles of the Alexandria 4th track in blue to the south, railroad south, if you will, and to the north of the Long Bridge project, where the tracks, you see the tracks split there and diverge, that goes to Union Station, of course, continues along the CSX line. There's the L'Enfant project, which is the project for the VPRA TRV program that's in the extreme north. The inset that you see here represents the entirety of the Long Bridge project, roughly 1.8 miles worth. And of course, the noteworthy thing is we're still representing the information that we know to date, and we're preserving that the Long Bridge, as far as we know, is on target for 2030 delivery. To focus on the Long Bridge South package itself. So the South package is the extreme southern end that abuts the RO interlocking, which is the northern terminus for the Alexandria Fort Track project. And it's pretty much bookended at both ends by parks. So you have the Long Bridge Park to the left of page, if you will, which is Railroad South. And to the north of page, you see the East Potomac Park, bookending the Long Bridge project, South project, which is roughly 0.6 miles. And I actually paused when I kind of looked at the numbers, and I was like, 0.6 miles. How do I visualize that? So I thought of a football field. End zone to end zone, 360 feet. It's about 9 football fields long. And the scope of work for the Long Bridge South package encompasses 2 bridge structures. One, a double track rail structure, and adjacent to that, a pedestrian bike bridge, which will be owned by DDOT. So I didn't want to read the fine print there, but that's in essence what it says, right? So major features, it crosses the George Washington Parkway on the Virginia side, and then of course, the majority of it crosses Potomac, which is within the DC proper. I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Costello here to describe our procurement activities.
Can I just ask you one quick question?
Yes.
Did you say the pedestrian bridge is owned by DDOT? It will be. Are they contributing money to build it? DDOT?
As of now,
They are?
Their current budget has $52 million in contribution, and I believe it's in 27 and 28.
Okay.
So they've contributed, and then we would oversee the construction, and then at the end of construction, we would turn over the operation, maintenance, and ownership to them.
thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for that overview. I did mention at the beginning, we are in an active RFP. So we're just going to give high-level overviews. We're excited to work this procurement and look towards wrapping it up at the end of the year. And that's what some of these next slides are going to be about. But we did just want to bring it back to the board because this project will need board approval. So we thought it would just be a good time to tee it up on where we've been and where we're going to go for the rest of the year. Now, as a reminder, we're doing this as a 2-step RFP to bring on a design builder. And this design builder in this RFP will determine design builder that best meets our criteria that we set in the RFP and submits the best proposal and offers the best value to VPRA. Now, we decided to do this project as design build, and we wanted to put in bold here some of the activities that have been part of the RFP. A lot of people in design build brings collaboration to the table, and it helps get you a better project at the end of it. So we did just want to highlight that as part of the RFP, we've been having stakeholder communications, utility forums, site tours, ATCs, preliminary ATCs, final ATCs, one-on-one meetings, scope validation plans. There's just been a lot of collaboration and activity with all the firms that were shortlisted as they prepare their technical proposals and in turn their price proposals.
Mr. Costello, will you remind me, please, what an ATC is?
Alternative technical concept.
That's great. Thank you.
And then we did receive those. They came at the beginning of May, and VPRA is reviewing those now to provide feedback on the ATCs that may become part of the proposals. So we just wanted to highlight the activities that's going on that is setting us up for the final stages of this RFP. All the firms that are shortlisted are going to submit their technical proposals at the end of this summer. At the end of August 23rd, we're scheduled to receive the technical proposals. At that point, VPRA is going to review and, score the technical proposals to find a design builder that offers the best plans towards us. Now, we did just thought it was worth highlighting the technical proposals are due in August. The price proposals are due in October, and we have that on the screen here. The technical proposals will be reviewed and evaluated blind of the price proposal.
So John and I talked, and I was glad for the question, what is an ETC? So we wanted to pause, to drop in like all of those acronyms and whatnot, to just look at, design build. Why did we go design build? So to John's point, fostering collaboration, early collaboration between the contractor and the owner ourselves. So we'll have a direct contract with the contractor, where the contractor entity is a designer and the builder working concurrently, side by side, typically in joint ventures to deliver the project. So we have those early points of input. And as John described, we put that bolded line on the prior slide to demonstrate that although we are under this procurement umbrella, it's not as if we're inactive. There's a lot of activity going on. It's a lot of complex things, both on the internal VPRA team side as well as the contractor side, as we continue to look for best value out of the engagement. So we shortlisted when we spoke last time in December, shortlisted our vendors, and we've been going through the middle of them. So where we took the design that we had developed coming out of preliminary engineering, we landed at a 30% level of design. Because the South package had, and again, we did risk analyses, the South package had less, high level uncertainty and very critical level risks compared to the North package, where a question that may be circulating in some of our members' minds here is the North package is a progressive design build and South package is design build. Why are we doing that, right? So the design build allows us to then engage a contractor with 30% designs, go through the two-step process that John described, and actually get a binding lump sum price proposal at the end of it, which is where we're targeting.
If I can, real quick, to your point about the less risk in the South. Yesterday, a lot of you went out for a tour, and you were able to see where an old bridge crossed over a body of water right south of the Salamander Hotel. We're going to build a new bridge there, stage it, take the current one out of service, build another bridge, build a 4-track bridge there. Whereas Longbridge South, as you saw, we're building the new bridge next to the current bridge that's staying in service. So that goes to that risk that Ryan is talking, a lot less risk on the South package, and hence why the North package needed to go faster, because of that complexity we saw looking across the water.
Okay, I appreciate that segue, because we were talking risk. Now, pleased to hear that you all were able to see the projects, right? I think if anyone stood between the existing CSX bridges and the Wamata Bridge, it's less risky, it doesn't seem as easy. It's still complex, because when you stand there, you get a perspective from these massive structures that we're going to build, and it isn't a lot of space. However, they are independent, so therefore you have a lot more control as opposed to the Northern package.
They did stand between bridges at the NPS parking lot, and they were able to see how to build not only the Longbridge rail bridge, but the pedestrian bridge in there between the current Longbridge and the current Long Bridge.
So Michael, I'm getting confused. I know it's easy for me to get confused. So that's Longbridge North.
So Longbridge, when we were standing on the North Bank of Potomac, we were looking at Longbridge South.
And that's already been awarded to Skanska?
No,
Okay,
Skanska Flatirons Longbridge North, which was our last stops,
Yes,
the last couple stops. When we looked across the water,
yes.
that's Longbridge North. That been awarded.
That's-
That needed to go first because it was more complex.
Hey, Mike, can you stand up and point on the chart where we?
Yeah, would you mind, because I'm getting really,
Parking lot.
I'm
You can see right where we stood yesterday.
So Ms. Bashir, if you
I'm
saw,
sorry.
if you saw a body of water
Yeah.
for the Longbridge North, so if you recall, when you took the tour for Longbridge North, did you all go past the marina?
And we were, remember the old NPS building that often floods?
Yeah.
We were standing next to that.
So then you'd be on this side of
Yep, exactly.
Potomac Park, looking at the Washington Channel.
Yep, we were looking at the,
And so you're bookended, kind of like by the Washington Channel, like in that cluster, but
Right.
this is all the north. So then the south really starts here and goes to this one.
Oh,
So
thank
then-
you so much for that clarification.
Yeah, no. And so this is about 0.6 miles. This is about 1.2 to its conclusion. So overall about 1.8 miles of the project.
Okay, I thought all of that
That is
was
a great-
Long Bridge north, but it's not.
No,
It's that little piece is north, and that's Scanston Flatliner. And then we got the RFP out for the, okay, boy.
No,
So let me just, for the avoidance of doubt, yesterday we had 3 stops. One was at the Long Bridge Aquatic Center. which
Okay.
That was fine.
Yeah.
So we stood there,
Yes,
we looked northward, and that is the beginning, that's the southernmost end of the south package.
I
Our second
gotcha.
stop was right on the other side of the river facing south. So
Yeah.
right there, right. And then we looked south and we looked at the area between the 2 bridges and we saw
Mhm.
that all is the south package as well. And that's actually, we talked about, that's where the Pike Head Bridge lets off,
Yes,
right there.
okay, and that's what's outstanding.
Right. And then when we turned around the other way, we didn't really talk about it, but that's really the beginning of the north package. So then our third stop was right by the marina where we actually saw some of the early work stuff in the National Park Service parking lot. That's where we looked to our left, and then in front of us by the hotel where that bridge is going to be added, that's the north package. So our second stop facing south, the south package, facing north is the north.
I'm sorry, everybody, but thank you.
I stare at these slides all day. I do other things, but that's.
If you voice it out, the Head Bike Bridge is part of the south package.
Yes.
And that's procurement that's going on.
Thank you.
I appreciate the maps too, and then going out there, I heard so much about it too, but when I was standing out there for the first time myself, it was really, I could touch those bridges. I'm not the smallest cat in the world, but it's tight out there.
Well, I separate from Mr. Schuler to probably recognize, so this is a rendering.
Yes,
That's the renders in the new stuff, but you probably recognize old assets.
yes.
I did just thought it was worthwhile just to remind y'all, there's obviously been a lot of planning coordination with stakeholders on the Long Bridge project as an entirety and the Long Bridge South. That's been in progress for the past several years. Like Pi said, we've been getting up to 30%. There's been a lot of just utility tests going on out there, stakeholder coordination. Just thought it was worth mentioning the progress that got us to where we are right now in this RFP. We also did bring on in 2023, the project management support services with Long Bridge Partners, and y'all approved that contract as well. So they've been brought on to help us with Long Bridge. And so it was worth mentioning too, what got us here. We did do a 2-step procurement, and the first step was request for qualifications. We did shortlist off the qualifications, and we asked firms, and the SOQ RFQ allowed firms to demonstrate their ability and qualifications to undertake the design and construction of the Long Bridge. So we were looking at their quals before we shortlisted the firms that are now part of the RFP. All this is leading us up to when we get the technical proposals, when we get the price proposals, VPRA is going to select the design building that brings the best value to this project. When we do, we're going to need board approval. So this slide is talking about some of the next steps with board approval. We are going to provide, we're optimistic that we'll have a notice of intent later this year, around November timeframe. And then from there, we're going to present to y'all the brief and advise you on how we got there, on the contract, on the agreement, on everything that y'all need to be able to vote on it. Now, we did want to put an asterisk. We're assuming that we'll have this done and have a notice of intent and work on negotiations for an agreement to have to y'all in December ahead of the January board meeting when we would be asking for a potential vote. But there's also a potential if negotiations are going well and faster, we may call a special board meeting to try to advance it.
Yeah, if there's ever, we talked about this last year, if things go quicker, we can review in November and go to execution December, we'll do that. The team is a busy team and they do need some time to review and go through it, but, so these are still tentative. We talked about that with these guys the other day, we're finalizing these slides. So if negotiations go well, then we could even come to you even sooner than this is showing.
John, if I could, and Mike, to your point, so the other thing that we're doing too is we haven't lost sight of the fact that one package is a sub package, although they're disparate packages, it's one Long Bridge bill. So we're actually ensuring that pace at which we're going with procurements through the procurement cycle makes sense with how we're coordinating them and continuing to de-risk things. So, part of the tail end where we have some ambiguity with the base would be when we get into earnest negotiations with contractors. So, speed that up, just those try to get value of the engagements. We will try to move as quickly as we can. Certainly just want to try.
Next steps, just as a recap, it's going to be a busy summer for VPRA and our design builders that are shortlisted. As we work towards receiving their technical proposals and their price proposals, there's going to be a lot of juggling going on to get us to those proposals coming in later this summer and early fall. Then VPRA is excited this fall to review the technical proposals and see the price proposals. And then we are optimistic that at the end of the year or before the January board meeting, we will be seeking board approval before we execute any contracts. And then once we execute a contract, similar to some of our other agreements, we are optimistic that we can give a notice to proceed for phase one soon after we have the contract executed if it's approved. And that would lead us towards substantial completion in 2030. So this slide looks very easy. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be an exciting, busy summer and fall. We will need board approval. And then obviously there's a lot of stuff that happens for that last bullet, but we are optimistic that we're going to have a great time built on board. And that's a major step towards being done by 2030.
Just wanted to make one quick comment. We talked a lot with New River Valley about the importance of engaging stakeholders. And I want to give these guys another round of kudos for the engagement that they've done with the industry. We often forget, because we're living in this space, that 4 years ago, this entity didn't exist, and now they're delivering mega projects. And it takes a lot of very deliberate, diligent work with the industry to socialize them to who we are, to say what we're going to do, to live up to those commitments we make for dates when things are going to go out on the street. And this team has built that confidence with the industry. I've heard it a lot that, there were people that saw this as, these are big projects as risks, but because these guys lay out very openly what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, they follow through with what they say. It's made this whole process go a lot better. So it's a strong partnership with the industry that they've had countless industry days. I know DJ is always going and talking to the Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance. Mike has done that. They really deserve a lot of credit for covering a lot of ground and building that credibility very early on with this organization. So thank you. Questions? All right, nice done, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right, more presentation left. Last but never least is our chairman. We didn't do this last time, so it's, nice to there's Jeremy. Mr. Latimer, welcome. Service performance and 209.
All right, good afternoon. I'm going to start, before I get into the performance part of this, talk about the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008. I have talked about this a little bit briefly in another presentation, but anything section 209. 209 is what we say a lot, but that is the agreement that Virginia Passenger Rail Authority has with Amtrak that authorizes Amtrak to operate the services, the 4 routes that we sponsor in Virginia. So looking at the entire network where there are Amtrak trains running throughout, we are part of that fleet. The light blue lines down here in the south, the 209 agreement is how we make it possible to run services in Virginia on those light blue lines. You can see the VPRA services orange there. We're kind of zooming into the Virginia section there, just a review of the trains that we're monitoring in our performance analysis. So the navy blue trains are the trains that Virginia sponsors. So we have the 2 daily round trips to Roanoke. You have 2 daily round trips to Newport News, the 3 daily round trips to Norfolk, and there is 1 daily round trip out of Richmond Main Street Station as well. We also have the Carolinian, which is sponsored by North Carolina. And then we have long distance services. The Cardinal, in the very far western part of the state, is 3 days a week. We also have the Crescent service, which actually goes down to New Orleans, and that's a daily train. The Auto train, which comes out of Lorton, Virginia, and shoots straight down to Florida. And then we have the Silver Star, the Palmetto, and the Silver Meteor, which are long-distance services. So they're not sponsored by Virginia, but they are very important to our service because they offer other services that a lot of Virginians book when you're booking Amtrak.com. You don't usually know if it's Virginia state support or if it's long distance. It's important for service performance. So the 209 agreement, it took effect on October 1st, 2013, for routes that are less than 750 miles that are operated at the request of the states. And it allows us to work with Amtrak on defining the cost-sharing methodology between Amtrak and Virginia. And so looking at Staples Mill Station, for example, where you saw there were both long-distance services, state-supported, and the Carolinian. In the Staples Mill Station scenario, we don't pay for the entirety of the station. We share costs proportionally because of the portion of service that we serve Staples Mill with. But in Norfolk, for example, that is exclusively, those 3 daily round trips are exclusively state-supported trains, and we do pay 100% of the maintenance staff costs at Norfolk. All that cost sharing comes out of the 209 agreement. It also establishes certain rates, like labor rates, so if we increase staff at a station, we'll have some predictability about how much our costs go up. And then it also defines things like the G&A rates that we pay a share of, because they're corporate expenses that states share with Amtrak. And as I mentioned earlier, so the Amtrak owns the fleet, so it's a little bit like a rental car fleet, right? So we pay a usage rate of the fleet that circulates throughout the system. We don't own the equipment in Virginia. It gives us that one-seat ride into the Northeast Corridor. The 209 agreement also allows us certain rights with our services. So we work with the revenue management team. We set the fares in Virginia. That's something that Steve's team has been working with us on. And we also adjust schedules and can change the overall service levels, which is something that we did during COVID. And then we have Amtrak quarterly meetings, which are part of those agreements. And that's where we address things with the executive levels at Amtrak on on-time performance, customer service, or other high priorities. And our quarterly meeting is tomorrow. One other thing about 209, it allows us to work with Amtrak and the other states collectively. This is something that Congress kind of gave us that charge to do. And so Congress actually funds a team that supports we call it SAFER-C, the State Amtrak Intercity Passenger Rail Committee. We have a meeting later this month in Chicago. We work on improving the transparency of the costs that are shared with us through Amtrak. We also negotiate various aspects of the methodology. We've been updating that for years now. And there are also service enhancement initiatives that we work on collectively with Amtrak, such as right now we're working on a pilot to localize food and beverage options on our services. So we actually have a kickoff this Saturday of brewing company out of Ashland. So now we'll jump into the performance side, and I'm going to start with VRE. Mr. Dalton, do you want to say anything before I jump into the details here?
Jump into the details.
Okay.
So I'll just say right on the onset, this is less than desirable.
Right. So, and it's not just VRE that's struggling. Amtrak is also struggling out there on the section of track between Washington and Richmond. So in April of this year, at a VRE service, which is the on-time performance defined as that last scheduled stop within 6 minutes of the scheduled arrival time, at 75.9% of the time arriving on time. So looking over here, down in the lower right-hand corner of the trains by numbers, blue being on the Manassas line, red being on the Fredericksburg line. A lot of these are those earlier or later trains when some of the congestion has let up or hasn't started yet in the day, and a lot of the worst performing trains are the ones that get held up in the congestion in that midday time frame. I will say 329, we talked about that briefly as you come in. It really, that one isn't quite as bad most of its route. It's usually towards the end there where it's getting tripped up and doesn't register as on time. Any further comments? I'll let you go. All right, moving down to the state-supported services, the ones that we sponsor, the Northeast Regionals that are extended into Virginia. We were at about 60% in April of this past year. So we are also not doing as spectacular. The goal is 80%. If you look down here on the right, our best performing trains are also typically the morning or the late evening trains. And then we also have our afternoon trains that get caught up in congestion. That seems to be the theme there. And you can see we were holding at the beginning of the year around 12,000 minutes, but we spiked in April. And we have some consistency in the issues that we're seeing. I'm going to go over those, but I just want to stop here. Any questions on overall on-time performance for Virginia service? Long distance service. Long distance has longer to travel, therefore they have more opportunities for the service to degrade on the way. So we usually see lower on-time performance with these services. These were the ones in orange. So we had about 39% on-time, all-station on-time performance in April for the trains that are coming up from Florida. They struggle especially because they have that longer route over several other freight railroads on their way into Virginia. And then we also have some trains coming out of Washington that struggle as well. So overall, long distance is our worst performing, and that of course affects the appearance, the customer experience, regardless of the train flow. If it's not on time, it's not a good experience. So these are the major themes that we're tracking right now for the service performance committees. And I'm going to go over each one, but at a high level, CSX has a heat order policy. Every railroad has to have a heat order policy. CSX is very conservative, but we're trying to adjust for that. We've talked about it for years. VPRA has adjusted schedules in the summertime, previous to this summer, but this is the first time that we're doing it for the Virginia State Supported Service. So as of Memorial Day, we have a schedule in place that lasts until September, Labor Day. And that aligns with VRE, so we had to slow things down just a little bit to anticipate frequent heat orders, and there are heat orders out there today. Washington Union Station, delays persist and are actually getting a little worse. We'll talk about that. There continues to be struggles in Washington Union Station getting trains, the southbound trains, into Virginia on time. We have seen a spike in freight train interference, particularly between Richmond and Fredericksburg. We are going to do more analysis on that. That spike came before the Maryland Bridge collapse. It's not necessarily because of more freight coming to Virginia, which there is more freight coming to Virginia right now. And then slow orders. Slow orders happen when we have construction projects out there and you have some work going on, so you have to slow trains down so they go through the area where they finish work and things are still settling. So we are expecting to see more slow orders as we go into the construction season. For heat orders, so the data that we've been tracking since 22 shows that the gray bars, the delays associated with CSX heat orders spiked in June, July, and August. And that's why we aligned with VRE on implementing it on Memorial Day and going to Labor Day with our heat order policy. So you see the orange line being the high temperatures and the blue line being the low temperatures on a daily basis on an average each month. And so that follows with the overall delays associated with heat orders. So when we adjusted schedules, we looked at what is the possibility this train is going to be affected by the heat order schedule. So one of the things we know about the CSX network, when they implement a heat order on any given day, it is effective from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. So that right there kind of narrows down the trains that are going to be affected. We also looked at the existing recovery in the schedule because between 2 points, you have your run time and you also have cushion schedule. And we didn't want to just add unnecessarily if cushion was already there. We can reallocate that cushion somewhere else if necessary. So we looked at a number of factors to try and calibrate and optimize schedules during this 3-month period. And these are the trains, and you can see either both northbound and southbound throughout the RFP network to mainly Norfolk and Newport News, and the one to Richmond. Of course, the Roanoke train is less effective there over Norfolk Southern, and Norfolk Southern does not have as conservative a heat order policy. So on any given day like today, where there's a heat order on the CSX network, there is not one on the Norfolk Southern network. So we added between 5 and 15 minutes depending on the train. So how are we going to judge this? Because this is a pilot. We don't know if we're going to do it again if it doesn't work. Because there are a lot of things that affect on-time performance. But one of the things we want to see is an average heat order delay minute per train. We hope it goes down. And by association, we hope the on-time performance per train is going to go up. So that's pretty basic. We want to see things level out between heat order days and non-heat order days. So we want to see the difference kind of level. And then we want to see the customer service index improve. This is one of many things that causes, late trains and that affects the customer experience. We're tracking the CSI scores that Amtrak surveys their customers. And then we also want to make sure the dwell times on non-peak order days aren't excessive. So we are probably going to see your train on a day that's not as hot or doesn't have as big a swing of temperature. You might get to Alexandria and sit there for a little while if it's not a heat order day. We're trying to minimize that to the point we can. These will be the metrics that we look at the end of the season. So how do we communicate that to customers? It was really a one-time announcement. If anybody had already bought a ticket and you already knew your schedule, you were contacted either by email or by text or however you chose it when you buy your ticket. That's an option you choose. But we didn't put in any warnings when you go onto the website to book. So what you see here is the absence of some sort of icon telling you there's a delay. And that's actually new. There's often Amtrak is putting in a lot of cautions or notices, and we've really been working with Amtrak to calibrate that and only get the message out to customers who need it or get it to a specific train. So for example, we had a train 65 that was going to be affected by some construction one weekend. Well, they put it in the systems that affected all the Newport News trains, 65 being a weekend train going to Newport News. So we were able to work with them to just put it on that one train network. We don't want folks who are on train 67 to think there's a delay if there's not. So we're working with Amtrak. They actually have a meeting on June 6th to come up with a more inclusive process for VPRA to be part of the regular, coming up with this language and deciding how it goes out to customers. So again, a good partnership with Amtrak there. So I want to talk a little bit about Union Station. Union Station, we've known for some time, if you've been remembering all the data that I show you, Union Station has been a focus because it is the single point where we have the largest amount of delays. And everything in green at the top shows you anything above 80% we put in green. And these are trains arriving at Union Station. Actually, this is train 91. This is long distance trains, not all the trains. So we're looking at southbound of Florida. It's a long distance train. Getting into Washington relatively well. But once it's in Washington, things are happening. And by the time it gets to Alexandria, on-time performance has fallen drastically. And it's only gotten worse. And so we started looking at this train, what we're kind of calling through train performance when it goes through Washington. So 29 times in April, it arrived early and departed on time. 37 times arrived on time, departed on time. That's great. Arrived late, departed on time. There were no instances of that. And then we had one where they arrived late, but they made up some time and departed less late. So those I put in the pretty good column. It's the ones where they're arriving late and departing later, or arriving on time and departing late, which is the largest number in the late section, or arrived early and then departed late. These are the ones we want to work on because the congestion Union Station then sends a train out of slot into Alexandria, and there's already VRE congestion and other trains that may be on time or not on time, and it's really messing everything up in Virginia.
This was southbound. I know it's just one train. Does the same thing occur if you go northbound?
Yes. So you have more, well, it's a very different world out there. Amtrak dispatches everything. Once you're south, you see sections dispatching, and there's also freight trains and slow orders. But starting out and coming into the Virginia network, the reason we see this as a problem is you're kind of sending a bowling ball through when you might already have a train. And I've been on time trains coming south where CSX will then hold that train for a very late train coming north, and all of a sudden this one's late. So everything gets out of network or out of slot, and that's just a mess. So we start focusing on the poorest performers, say if we can fix some of these, we might see everything start to improve. So that was train 91. Looking at train 99, this is a southbound Newport News train on the weekends. It is our highest ridership weekend train. Everybody coming home after a fun weekend. And this consistently has been a poor performer. Now, which I don't have in here is all the data all the way back from 22. We've been tracking this one for a long time. Looking at the Washington, the very top line, we've actually seen improvement. Amtrak has been working on this. Getting it off the quarter into Washington Union Station has improved. And since November, we've actually seen some 100%. Now, I would say it operates usually about 8 times per month. It's a weekend train. So there's more chances to miss and see your numbers drop. But this is one where we can get into Washington on time, but then it falls apart as it comes into Virginia, and then we have a terrible experience as it goes through the corridor out of slot. Being a weekend train, it has less congestion in Union Station. VRE isn't operating. So this is one of those ones where we're going to do so on sites. We want to know why, on the weekends especially, one of our highest ridership trains continues to be a dog once it gets into Virginia. And it really does have to do with there's just a lot going on at Union Station to overcome. So looking briefly at Union Station, we track what are the delays by cause. So that left-hand bar, engine swaps, which means the train is waiting for a diesel locomotive, continues to be one of the largest reasons for delays. It includes equipment and yard crew shortages, meaning they're still having shortages of crews. We also have late onboard crews, which means that the crew may have come in late on the train, or they had rest time, or whatever the reason may be. They didn't get to that train in a timely manner. And now we have a new thing that's showing up, which is called the blue flag rule. So when Amtrak has to put blue flags on a train because they're working on that train, you now have to have one person put that flag on the front and on the back. So they have to walk the entire length, which means the train is now holding up that track space for an even longer amount of time. Every train, every day. And so that is starting to show up as additional congestion in an area where we only needed less congestion. So we are struggling to understand these challenges as rules change as well as structural issues to overcome. That was Union Station. So now I want to shift a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're handling a lot of the construction projects coming online. So you probably remember this is really just our way of saying we want to know if there's going to be work out there. Is it going to be short term? Is it going to be long term? Is there a lot of them? What's the impact? And what are we going to do about it? We're just going to give notice. We're going to reschedule work. Are we going to do a schedule change? Or are we going to cancel service? One example I thought I would show you is that Amtrak has a very large switch program going on to rehabilitate switches at Union Station. And this is only a portion of the map of the switches that they have underway. And they're doing this mostly on weekends with 55-hour outages. This is going to affect us very soon. The boxes in orange, these switches on the very edges as you come into the tunnel that leads into Virginia. So that is the gateway into Virginia. We're going to see a first test of this towards the end of this month. At our quarterly meeting, we're hoping to get better information on which trains will be canceled because of this work. It'll probably be a couple of trains. It's time to test. What we're more concerned about is what's going to happen when the red ones are done, which we think may happen in August. It's not 100% yet. But that could be an almost complete closure of the tunnel in Virginia. We may get one or two trains out. That's our ask. But we know this work has to be done. This is a safety issue. So we can't ask Amtrak not to do work. We just have to sometimes recognize construction is going to cause pain like this. And some of these projects are going to be our own as we start to build Long Bridge and Fourth Track and other things. We're going to have to ask for Amtrak to then be already share the pain. So that's coming. We're tracking also throughout our own network. This is only showing projects coming online. This is not showing the CSX maintenance work, which picks up in the summertime. But when you look at Washington, we recognize there's major work going on. It's going to have impacts to service. We also have some initial work starting out in Fredericksburg, VRE is wrapping up in Fredericksburg. And we also have some work starting up in Alexandria. And then we also have the Quantico work. So Quantico Station will be opening soon. We have just about every weekend in June, we have some work going on. We have plans in place to mitigate how trains are affected, but we are wrapping up a project that officially started construction in 2014. So 10 years later, we should be closing these out.
Jeremy, when could be some weekend closures or outages, as soon as we get that final from Amtrak, we should be getting it up here really soon. We communicate that to everyone we can.
Yeah, and the good news is they do this work at night, so we're minimizing what impacts happen to our trains. And they usually do it on the weekends, which minimizes the impact of the VRE. So CSX does do a great job on working with us. They call us, they show us what they want to do, they go to Amtrak, they get more input, and we all decide on it. So with the Quantico work that I mentioned, we had April 20th and June 1st last weekend, we had some work. So we knew that we had outages, and so we had a plan in place. So another one of these service notices went out, and so we kind of did an after-action review. And Without having to go through all the text on here, the main thing is to say the trains that were affected, train 97, a long distance train, was over Meteor down in South Carolina. The train 98 is the northbound version of that. Those trains coming through our area did not have an impact, so our plan worked. So that didn't mean they didn't have any delays because they had a 5-hour plus delay in Florida due to a freight train interference. Can't help that, right? But the main thing is to say our goal when we have construction going on is to not cause a bigger problem that's already out there. We're trying to make sure that we're not adding to the problem. So generally, looking at what happened last weekend, I don't have official information. I've got preliminary, but it looks like we had a similar situation where we had minimal impact in services because we changed schedules. That was the end of that. So I just wanted to mention also there that we are calibrating as well about how we get that information out to folks that have already purchased, and sometimes it's providing additional information on those trains. So for instance, train 97 was delayed 4 hours. If you were to book the train earlier, train 87, you would not have that 4-hour change. So getting the right information. That is presentation on service performance. Any questions?
Jeremy, I love that data. That's, I don't, what you mean, I don't like that data, but that was all, I mean, that's really good, isn't
The
it?
data is good.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, it's really
The
good.
results are not,
Yeah.
are less than desirable.
Yeah, but that shows you where you have to improve, right? Or what you got, in your case, you're more different.
Sure,
but-
and I'll point out, if you don't mind, that you don't have to switch back, but when you showed all that, when Jeremy showed all that work that's happening at Washington Union Station,
Yeah,
you know, having that work done over the next couple of months is really important to our collective operation for the weekday service and that. So to Jeremy's point, we have to do this.
Yeah.
We have to get that work done, and it's only going to benefit us collectively once that work is done.
Yeah.
Quantico, another one. We're going to wrap that up here hopefully within the next 60 days, 90 at the latest. That opens up almost 9 miles of additional 30 track boards as well. So,
Right. We get through the pain and on the other end, get more capacity.
exactly.
I really like this concept of services notice, because that, it manages expectations. So I always like to say, no one talks about high-speed rail, I'm thinking, I don't care if the train is going at 200 miles per hour or 50 miles per hour. I just want to make sure when it says it's leaving at this time and it arrives at that time. I only care about their, arrival. Safety, of course, is always understood. But yeah, I just think that's really great that you're doing that. So, passengers can make a decision. It's going to be an hour, 2 hour late, and maybe I'll rent a car, or maybe I'll do whatever. But gives them options. So again, managing those expectations. That's really good. Thank you so much. I thought this was excellent.
We've been learning a lot through it. I mean, again, it's one of those things that working, there's always more people to work with it. It's very helpful. So this meeting on June 6th, kind of get the process established where we're involved. It's going to help us a lot because they can calibrate a lot of their decisions.
And for the hats off to Amtrak, because Amtrak used to be like an adversary to the states. You know what I'm saying? There's always like this, and now there's like working
What states you
together.
talk to today?
I would say for the most part, there's a general recognition how Amtrak is really working hard. So thank you. And
I'll take that back.
please do, because I think that's really a good thing for Amtrak.
Great. More questions for Jeremy? The on-time performance to the 95 today.
It's looking good.
Yes.
Right before you-
I'm asking for a friend. There's a few. I can see how they're on that train.
Are you going to the Amtrak station?
Thank you.
I need to follow you. I've never done that.
I've only come from there once.
Well, there may be others.
Yeah,
I've been there all.
All right, so that wraps up the items on our agenda today. A couple of things. We do have a personnel and compensation committee scheduled for Friday morning at 9:30. As always, any of our commissioners are welcome to sit in on those, on any of those committee meetings. So that one is all remote. So that one's 9:30. And then the next, I think that, Jeremy, can you go to the next slide? Because I think you gave us a preview of the next one.
Sure. So the next VPRA board meeting will be Tuesday, August 27th. That'll be back in Richmond in our building, the Truist Building. We'll probably start, so folks will be trained on, we'll probably start at 10:30, to be my guess, based on the train schedule. I'll have to check with Jeremy, see if we change our schedules. And then you can see for the rest of 2024, we've got the November 19th, it's the last meeting of our SBTs. We'll probably have a second session in December. So those are the meetings coming up. I also just like to publicly thank Jen Rule. This is a personal conversation, probably I won't be there, but this is her last board meeting. She has been a huge advocate for VPRA, Task Rail. I think she's been a strong leader of this board, and we will be next.
Thank you, and we, stand adjourned, I should have done that.
See you.